Hi, I'm Suzan DelBene, co-chair of the Women's High Tech Coalition, and I want to thank all of you for joining us for this exciting discussion on technology policy as we head into the new year. But first, I want to thank another Susan, my fellow co-chair, Representative Susan Brooks. Representative Brooks is retiring at the end of this Congress, and we will all greatly miss her. I want to thank her for being such a great partner and for being a valued member of the Susan Caucus. Lots is happening. We just went through a historic election with a new Congress and a new president. And this will shape the landscape going into the next year, our daily lives, and the economy. I'm excited to continue the work of this coalition with the Biden administration in addressing some of the biggest technology issues that are before us, including broadband connectivity, 5G infrastructure, the Internet of Things and devices, consumer data privacy, and so much more. That's because technology is not just a separate industry. It is transforming every industry and every part of life that it touches, from agriculture and infrastructure to healthcare and education. It's changed the way that we live our lives, how we communicate with one another, the way we purchase products, and especially right now, the way that we work. On the other side of the coin, we're also seeing some of the unintended consequences of the internet, specifically when it comes to social media. Too often, we see stories about how social media platforms are being used to promote conspiracy theories and spread hateful ideology. When companies don't protect an individual's data or they sell it to a private company, people can be targeted by unsavory groups looking to spread disinformation. That's just one example of why we need to update our laws to reflect the way things work and the challenges that we face in the 21st century. This will continue to be a top priority of mine as we head into the next Congress. Right now, Americans are spending roughly 24 hours online per week, and a quarter of people say that they're on the internet almost constantly. Knowing this, we have a responsibility to ensure consumers have a clear understanding of what happens to their data, and that companies aren't taking advantage of innocent people's most sensitive information. This isn't just about consumer rights, it's about constitutional, civil, and human rights in a digital world. Data privacy is the foundational policy that we will build on as we work to address other issues like artificial intelligence and facial recognition. That's why I introduced HR 2013, the Information Transparency and Personal Data Control Act, which would change the way consumers' personal private information is collected, stored, and shared. This legislation would ensure all users are presented with companies' privacy policies in plain English. Because we all know when a screen pops up on a website with a lot of confusing language, it's easier for consumers to just click, "I agree," without fully understanding what they're agreeing to. The bill would also require companies to have users opt in before they can use those people's most sensitive private information in ways the public may not expect. And companies that don't comply would be held accountable. The Federal Trade Commission and state attorneys general would be empowered to pursue those that are not in compliance with this legislation. These are bold yet common sense actions to protect consumers. The coronavirus has also shed a painful light on how behind Congress is in modernizing the way that it works. Before coming to Congress, my background was in technology, so it was a bit of a culture shock when I arrived and saw just how behind that we were. That's why I joined the Select Committee for the Modernization of Congress to help incorporate 21st century technologies that will allow us to be more efficient in our work and better able to communicate with our constituents. On the Select Committee, I advanced recommendations around the use of electronic signatures, conducting virtual hearings in Congress, and more. These efforts will ensure that we can continue to move legislation, conduct critical oversight of federal programs, and make sure that lawmakers and staff have the tools they need to work remotely. While there's no doubt that we've had some serious challenges ahead, I believe that we're up to the task with the critical work of the Women's High Tech Coalition. So thank you for joining us here today. I hope you enjoy the rest of the event, and I look forward to working with all of you as we move forward. Please stay safe and stay healthy.
Been the discussion I've had with the Congresswoman when we've talked about it. But moving forward, she's very hopeful that 5G will continue to play a role in the development of American technology and our economy, and she's been a champion for that. She founded the 5G caucus a couple of years back before it had really kind of entered the lexicon. It seems to be now that every committee in Congress seems one way or another to want to get their fingers into that issue space, just because it's kind of a trendy thing. And we're continuing to see that network get deployed nationally. Indianapolis, we like to tell, was actually the first city in the country that had both AT&T and Verizon testing 5G network deployment within the city, and now it's officially deployed and usable by consumers who have the requisite devices capable of harnessing the technology across the country at this point. And so we're only going to see that deployment continue. And there are some governance issues with the way 5G is being used at this point. The Congresswoman has previously opposed rumored attempts, potential actions by the administration to try and privatize. The term has been thrown around kind of very loosely by folks at potentially the DoD and others to offer a government-run network that works on the 5G layer of spectrum needed to operate that. And that's something that she has disagreed with wholeheartedly, just because the way that American technology and telecom companies have come to be an envy of the world is that our free market system has really supplied the drive to figure out where efficiencies can be best allocated and who needs what the most. And so I think that's something that she would hope to see. So that effort to try and offer some sort of government run spectrum wholesale market, whatever you want to call it, hopefully that would fall by the wayside in the coming months and years. But you never know. I think the other thing that she would like to see moving forward as well is we continue to need probably a firmer centralized authority in dealing with 5G issues. Just like I've mentioned a couple times, the spectrum that the 5G networks are going to operate on, a lot of it, they call it the prime mid-band is a phrase that the industry uses quite a bit. And that is a lot of times occupied by someone else who was given spectrum there first. And historically, there has not been a need to reallocate spectrum, but we keep running into these fights now just because of the way communication has to happen between devices. I chalk it up to science as the way the industry folks I talk to describe it to me. And so I think having a firmer hand to iron out these fights and disagreements between agencies and departments is going to be really critical as well, just because there are international players. Everybody hears about China quite a bit and the threat that they pose in the technology space. And if they are leading the world, I think that is a problem for the values that America holds dear, specifically being free market competition and respect for a lot of privacies that U.S. citizens expect, but not necessarily over in China and according to the Chinese Communist Party. There's a lot more that can be said, but I will leave it there and appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Rob. And I think if anyone has any questions for Rob, now could be a good time if you want to put them in the chat box. And if not, we can circle back towards the end of the event, because we do plan to have a question and answers period after Ashley's presentation. Next, I wanted to introduce Ashley Golds, a tech reporter at Axios, who has previously written and reported for BBC, Politico, and the Washington Reporter. She's going to provide us an overview of what we can expect in the next Congress and administration on technology policy. So thank you so much, Ashley, for joining us.
Hi, nice to have everyone here, even though we can't be together in person. And my last job was actually at a publication called The Information. I was the Washington reporter for them, but no worries, Christina. Just wanted to clear that up. So yes, I'm here at Axios, and we're very much in the throes of covering the Biden transition and what it's going to mean for tech. Obviously, things are a little hard right now with the current administration putting up its fight and not fully conceding and letting the transition activities happen the way they normally would, which makes covering the transition a little harder too. But the Biden camp is full speed ahead, and we know what the House looks like, and we have a decent idea of what the Senate looks like. Of course, in January, we're going to know for sure whether Democrats are controlling the Senate or not, which will really change the calculus on whether a lot of what's being talked about is going to pass or not. But we can start outside of Congress, and that is at the agencies. The Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice specifically is where we're seeing action on the antitrust front. So most recently, the Justice Department finally brought its lawsuit against Google, specifically for now having to do with defaults and having Google as the default search engine on Androids and Samsung phones. And that case is ongoing. We know that Google did not file a motion to dismiss, so we are going to get a better idea of the scheduling of that case soon. But there are more shoes to drop. So, you know, despite what's going on with the election and with Congress, you've got all these state attorney generals that are working on their own things that have to do with big tech and antitrust. We're still expecting more groups of state attorneys general to bring antitrust action against Google. That could happen literally any minute. That could happen this week, next week. So we are looking for that. Of course, the distraction of the election is slowing some of that down, especially because state attorneys general are getting involved in some of those fights. But we do expect to see more of that soon, and we do expect at least a group of state attorneys general to enjoin their case with the Justice Department to make it a broader case. So we will see that play out. However, that's going to spill into the Biden administration. We have no reason to believe the Biden administration is going to stop the DOJ Google case. They'll certainly pick it up and keep it going. But a new administration and new staffers at the DOJ could change the direction of the case. So, you know, you've got your career staffers who are going to keep doing their work on the case the way they normally would, but we're going to get a new head of the antitrust division. The current head of the antitrust division is recused from the Google case, Megan Delrahim, which has meant a staff shakeup in who handles the Google case. So, you know, we could have new people in charge, a new head of the department replacing Bill Barr. And while I don't think the Biden administration is going to go easy on Google, I think they will possibly change the tenor of the case. So we've got that, and that will keep going. That could keep going for years. At the Federal Trade Commission, we're expecting an antitrust lawsuit against Facebook any day now, and that is also something that will have to continue into the next administration. I expect that the Federal Trade Commission wants to get this done before the end of the year, before Joe Simons, the current chairman, in all likelihood steps down at the end of the Trump administration. But then again, if they don't feel their case is airtight, they would wait, because the FTC is really not an agency that pushes things through just for the sake of it. They like to be really meticulous, really slow, really make sure their case is rock solid before they do anything. If the Federal Trade Commission does bring this antitrust case, it will have to do with Facebook's acquisitions of Instagram and WhatsApp. And I think more than anything, what it will do is sort of set this precedent about acquisitions and mergers, and it will sort of put bigger tech companies on notice when they're thinking about making a large acquisition the way Facebook did with Instagram and WhatsApp. It might, you know, produce a bit of a chilling effect when tech companies are thinking about buying smaller companies. So that leads us to the Hill, where, you know, everyone's well aware that there was a big antitrust report that came out in the summer. David Cicilline, the head of the House Judiciary Committee Antitrust Subcommittee, just spoke at an antitrust conference this morning, and he said that he and Congressman Ken Buck, a Republican, were working on antitrust legislation that would address the Sherman Act and the Clayton Act, and making sure their definitions are refined for, you know, the age we're living in now in the digital economy. There's agreement among Republicans and Democrats that the Federal Trade Commission and the Justice Department need more resources to do the work they're doing. So I think maybe getting them more money and more staff is something both sides can agree on that we actually could see happen. But other than that, it's going to be hard to get bipartisan agreement on antitrust legislation. I think the House is a little further along in that regard because the process there has been bipartisan, but the Senate is pretty far apart on antitrust. And if the Republicans maintain their majority, it's likely that conversations around antitrust will continue to revolve around this idea of conservative bias. So that is a bit of a tough one. That leads us to basically this kind of deadlock we're in right now. There's a lot of anger towards tech. There's a lot of anger about misinformation. There's a lot of anger about alleged conservative bias. There's anger about tech companies stopping their political ads. There's anger about them not stopping their political ads. They're basically getting it from all sides, and they are in a tough position. But the only comfort to them the past, year or so is that lawmakers are so divided on why they're mad at tech that no law, that someone proposes that, attempts to combat these issues ever passes, because there's just not enough agreement over the solution to the perceived problems. If the Democrats do retain or obtain a majority in the Senate, it's possible some of their ideas will make it through and that they will see some new legislation for tech that probably has to do with disinformation and privacy. I'm glad that Rob brought up Section 230, one of my favorite topics. So there's, bipartisan agreement that Section 230 needs to be changed. Joe Biden has said multiple times he'd like to revoke it. I don't doubt that he still feels that way, but he's going to have his hands so full when he takes office and get in control of this pandemic that it's hard for me to imagine that this is top on his list. I think just the amount of oxygen in the room is going to be beneficial to tech when Biden takes office, because there are many, many larger, more life-threatening things that need to be taken care of, and tech can probably breathe easy for a while they're working out the biggest issues. But that doesn't mean, the scrutiny is going to go away. In regard to the transition, you guys have probably all seen the transition list that the Biden camp put out yesterday. There's a lot of tech names on it. There's a lot of familiar names from the Obama administration on it. So, it might be easy to think, well, it's going to be back to the friendly Obama era tech days and, it's going to be just the same. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think tech is still going to be scrutinized, but I think it's going to be a little more focused. And there's going to be a little more partnership between the federal government and tech for things like COVID-19 and how else tech can help us with some of these thorny problems. The lines of communication are not going to be so blurry anymore. And I think you're going to see the end of tech companies. I think Biden's people will still single out tech companies when they are angry with a decision they've made. But I think it will be different than now. You're not going to wake up and see President Biden tweeting about a decision Facebook or Twitter made. That tenor is going to change. And I think that will be quite a relief to many tech employees. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. I'm open to answer any questions and, discuss any topics further.
So everyone can type your questions over in the chat box. I'll start. I guess I'm not doing what I said I was going to do, but typing it in the chat box. But wondered if you have any insights into what the FCC is going to look like next year, what the roster might look like, and what policy might look like.
Yeah, I actually meant to bring up the FCC. We are working on a story right now about that. So as you guys all probably know, Trump is trying to push through one more nominee, Nathan Symington, to take Mike O'Reilly's seat. He just had a nomination hearing yesterday. Senator Blumenthal has put a hold on his nomination, and we're not convinced that we're not convinced that the Republicans are going to be willing to devote floor time to get him nominated. So we're not sure he'll make it on. But if the FCC becomes majority Democrat again with either Commissioner Clyburn or Rosenworcel at the forefront, we can probably assume that we'll see the return of Obama-era net neutrality rules. There will be a big focus on closing the digital divide and increasing rural broadband, especially during the pandemic. And there will probably be absolutely no focus on Section 230. I think that will get dropped completely. And I think you would really see the FCC kind of return to like the Wheeler era FCC. I think that's safe to say. But that's if the Democrats, get a majority, which, is up in the air. These other questions. On net neutrality, I believe the Democratic commissioners would want to bring back the rules that the Republicans rolled back when they got a chance, when the FCC became Republican controlled again in the Trump administration. I don't know if they would be able to go all the way like that. It would be difficult for sure, but I think that would be the goal. In the original days of the net neutrality debate, there was a lot of talk that this should be left to Congress and there should be a law sort of outlining the broad principles of net neutrality. So it wasn't left to the agencies and there wasn't this ping pong every time the agencies makeup changed. I'm sure you've heard that term before, the ping pong. So it's possible we see a push for net neutrality legislation to avoid that. But, we couldn't even get privacy legislation done this year. And that was a major, major goal. So I'm not holding my breath personally. Stacy said, any new members who will be leaders in the tech space? I don't know. Honestly, no one really stuck out to me as far as new members. Yeah, I mean, when I think of new members that are sort of making a difference in the tech space, like it's sort of on the fringes. So there's members on the Republican side that have been very angry about the content moderation decisions of Twitter and Facebook. And I think that conservative pressure, like such as Matt Gaetz and a couple others, and like, I really do think that pressure trickles up and reaches the decision makers at these companies, and they think twice about what they're going to regulate based on who they're going to get pushback from. And then on the other side, like AOC and a couple other of the younger members, like they've been pressuring them on the other front about misinformation and about abuse online, abuse that they've received themselves. And I do think those conversations on kind of opposite sides do end up impacting how tech companies make these decisions. Okay, if today was 2021, what do you think you'd be saying that a Biden admin accomplished with regard to tech policy? If we're being ambitious and we're sort of setting aside the fact that there's a pandemic to control and there's a relief bill to pass and a budget to pass and all of that, I do think they will sort of get a handle on exactly what role they want the government to play in determining how companies moderate their content. I think it will become more clear what will be done with Section 230. I think that OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, will be built up quite strongly again. There'll be a lot of focus on future technologies such as artificial intelligence, beating China in that regard, jobs of the future, STEM. And the Trump administration did focus on those policies as well, but you're going to see all these Obama alum come back that have been working in Silicon Valley the past couple of years, and I think it's going to be a little easier for them to get things done. But we're in uncharted territory here. It's no longer tech is good, tech is great, tech helps us achieve our goals. There's a lot of conversations about how tech can be dangerous as well. So it's definitely going to be, a hard road ahead for them in regard to their lobbying and making sure laws that would severely impact their businesses don't get passed. What else I think the Biden administration might accomplish on tech policy? Privacy Shield got invalidated, and there's got to be a new agreement figured out there that, that's going to be on their to-do list. I know that impacts a lot of businesses. And with China, I mean, even just today, like I'm just seeing that TikTok is going to have a little more time and not get banned today. So all of these things they sort of have to figure out on the international stage: digital taxes, Privacy Shield, data sharing agreements. Biden is going to have to figure that out. And, he's no dove on China. He's tough on China, just like President Trump. But I think his reasoning and how he decides policies will be, not by tweet. Election security, yes. So I think what's interesting about this election is that it actually went really well. It actually went really smoothly. There was a lot of fear that foreign entities would sort of hack into our election systems and really throw things for a loop, and that it would be dangerous. And yeah, there were some issues here and there. I'm sure everyone saw the announcement a couple weeks ago about some movement from Iran and Russia. But overall, everything that I've read about the election is that it actually went smoothly, and there weren't any major problems. In that, there's no widespread evidence of fraud or anything like that. So I think that there was a lot of planning since 2016, since everyone was so spooked, and that cities and counties and election officials did a pretty good job and heated off any major threats. I'm just seeing myself about Christopher Krebs being fired by the White House, which is unfortunate because he's a highly, highly respected official in this regard, really respected by the cybersecurity world. I'm not a cybersecurity reporter. This is definitely not my area of expertise. But, he's done a really good job with keeping the U.S. prepared for secure elections, and has done a really good job of sort of pushing back against misinformation about the election. So it is a shame to see him go. I would imagine that a Biden administration, they haven't rolled out anything super specific on election security so far, at least not as far as I've seen in their transition plans or anything like that. But, Biden tends to talk about listening to the experts, deferring to the experts. I'm sure he's going to get people in that are very, knowledgeable about election security, and it's something he'd be willing to invest in and throw money at. And I know that's something that's of priorities to the DNC. And so I don't have super specific idea of what he's going to do, but I'm sure it'll be a priority. Next week's Senate Judiciary hearing. So if the past is any indication on when we get the big tech CEOs into Capitol Hill, and it's funny to say into Capitol Hill because everything is digital now, so they're just appearing via video conference, and it's not quite as exciting as it used to be. Is that if the Republicans are in charge, it ends up being a conversation about bias or alleged bias. And so we've got Jack Dorsey and we've got Mark Zuckerberg testifying, and the benefit to them of having testified so many times now is they've gotten good at it. The first couple of times they came, they were awkward. They had bad answers to their questions. They didn't know what to say, but they're kind of polished now. I have to say the last time they appeared, they really kept their cool the whole time. They weren't really thrown off by any of the questions. It's a major change from what we saw back in like 2017, 2018 when they first started coming. So I think next week, Jack Dorsey will continue to get blamed for the New York Post fiasco. And I think that they will talk about bias. They will talk about whether tech company, like I'm sure the Democrats are going to want to focus on whether the tech companies handle the election properly with their various labels of misinformation, with their shutdown of political advertising, and how they were able to control the stem of misinformation following the election that we're seeing now with all of the claims of voter fraud, which I repeat are totally unfounded. So there's going to be a lot to talk about. But if I had to predict, Democrats are going to want to talk about misinformation labeling and how the tech giants can control it. And Republicans are going to want to talk about how the way that they're controlling it is unfairly targeting them. And I can't imagine they're going to get a lot of consensus there, which is a shame, because when you have the CEOs of two of the most important tech companies in the world, before you in Congress, it's really an opportunity to talk about huge things that are important. But so often, because of bipartisan bickering, we end up squandering these opportunities, which is a shame, in my opinion. Yes, Dorsey and Zuckerberg are confirmed. They will be testifying, unless they pull out between now and then. But that is my understanding. Thoughts on facial recognition. So as far as facial recognition goes, I think we're really, really far from anything that might regulate facial recognition on a federal level. It's definitely something that lawmakers are thinking about, and there have been some bills introduced. But this is something where all the action is happening on the state level. There was something that passed in Portland, or I guess in the whole state of Oregon, correct me if I'm wrong, about facial recognition. And you're seeing a lot of state level lawmakers come up with facial recognition restrictions and things like that. And I'm a little wary that we would get something done nationally on that. But yeah, it's this hard balance of realizing it's an important and useful law enforcement tool that can help in cases where you're trying to find perpetrators of crimes, but a lot of concern about civil rights, especially with people of color, and being singled out. So it's a thorny one for sure.
I'll actually jump in there just to give a bit of a congressional perspective. I agree with everything Ashley said, but the way I've seen it and had it discussed among myself and colleagues on the Energy and Commerce Committee is it's always been in relation to privacy as a whole, if that makes sense. I think it's not viewed by members as a distinct enough technology to warrant its own specific category of legislation, at least on a broader regulatory level. And so I think until you kind of have a critical, I always say in technology, there are moments where things achieve critical mass and they reach public consciousness and suddenly everybody knows about it and everybody feels like it's a thing that everybody should be aware of. 5G is kind of having that this year, I think, and it's going to continue to grow as, like I said, consumer devices have that capability. But with facial recognition technology right now, it's seen as an element of something within the privacy debate. But Christina, happy to talk about the Modernization Committee's work. So my boss was also on that with the other Suzan who spoke via video earlier. And she actually focused a lot of her time on the ethics side of things, given she was, my boss was former ethics chair from last Congress. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the reforms she had talked about actually have to come from an outside group, and I'm blanking on the name. It's a former members of Congress group that helps Office of Congressional Ethics or something like that, that there's a lot of stuff that they could do to help improve operations on the ethics side of things that I was not involved with, just with my duties in the office. But in terms of technology, that was something that was talked about constantly. I think that COVID honestly showed us some of the limitations of the way the House operates right now. The clerk basically had to scramble to create some sort of way to authorize electronic submission of every congressional document that we would submit, whether it's a bill introduction, a co-sponsor edition, remarks for the record, anything like that, because there really wasn't a system in place because there was always someone available to get physical documents down there. And even now, as a staffer, I will personally say it's a little cumbersome the way they've created it. You basically have to create a document on behalf of the member that says the member is authorizing a subsequent document attached here is acceptable to be accepted digitally. So you're creating a digital copy that says you will accept an additional digital copy, but there's no true verification of that initial first digital authorization form, and it's all just PDFs and attachments that we send in email. So it's not like there's a formal house app that lets people do all this pretty swiftly. So I would be curious if there's any movement long term to further digitize house operations like that, because it is slick. When you can get it moving, it's very nice to be able to sit on my couch and just say, email the clerk and say, hey, please add Suzan DelBene as a co-sponsor to this particular bill we're on. So that's kind of been the long and short of it. I think that they are set to release. I believe they may have already released a final report, or at least a preliminary report, on a lot of their recommendations here. I'm not the staffer who handles that work, so I apologize. I was not up to speed on that. But it's certainly coming by the end of the year at this point, one way or the other.
And does that committee, is it finished at the end of this Congress, the select committee, or will it continue?
So it is technically done. I think it would require another act of Congress to keep them continuing, but I think that at this point they've worked for 2 years. They actually worked beyond the initial timeline of their statutory authorization. I think it was set to expire after 1 year, but they felt that they had so much more ground they could cover that they voted to extend it another year, basically through the end of the Congress. And the Congresswoman felt that was a victory for the group, because she felt that members were actually taking it pretty seriously. Senior question from Anna: do you think Congress will create something new or use existing programs regarding broadband? That's a good one. I think that Congress never doubt a member's desire to create a new program that they can take credit for, but I do think that there will also be a desire to try and re-examine the way some existing programs work. I think the FCC caught some flack a little bit with their new Rural Digital Opportunity Fund that they're going to be allocating millions of dollars for. And one of the complaints about it was that they were pushing some of the funds out initially before they had updated the broadband maps that they were going to be updating. I think they're expected to do that relatively soon. But the question was, why are you pushing out this money when we know we're going to get better data on where it can go in the coming months, maybe a year anyway? So I think that there will be certainly a re-examination of actions like that, and where money can go, particularly once we get better broadband mapping data as well.
Can I ask Rob a question?
Sure.
So it's my impression that Congress has kind of given up on national privacy legislation. Can you tell me if I'm wrong?
So short term, yes. Long term, I think it's unavoidable, quite frankly, because it's amazing to me in the past year, the conversations I have had with friends and family back home of folks who are, they're not, I feel like we've always kind of known a person or two in our lives who, as soon as the internet was online, they're like, oh yeah, you got to be careful. You don't know who's watching. But I've had a conversation with my mother-in-law, actually, who never cared to really think about any of that. And she was saying she was particularly mad at a specific tech company. I'm not going to name the name, just because of the way she's heard that they've dealt with some of the way they've not really protected their data. So I think for the public to have that kind of opinion about and be that conscious about how data is being used by these companies, I think that shows that there would definitely be a drive to address this issue moving forward, no matter what. And I think at the end of the day, every company in Silicon Valley would love to have a national standard anyway, just because I think when you have a country as big as ours, one of the reasons that we are such a economic powerhouse in the world is that when you have 50 small nations operating under one rule, that makes it so easy to be successful as a business too. So I think that there is growing social pressure that really didn't exist previously until a couple of years, maybe a year or two ago. Combined with the business interest, I think that is a recipe for guaranteed passage of something long term. What that looks like and how long term that means, I don't know. I would not be surprised if we see a serious draft of something occurring in the next Congress, though.
And also, so you mentioned Section 230. What I'm trying to wrap my head around is ideas around regulating Section 230 that the Democrats can agree on.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think that debate kind of lands?
Personally, I'm not as well versed on that, just because the debate, I'm versed on the Republican side of things, and even that is kind of fractious on our side on where some people land. And I think that the debate I've seen has been the discord between the Republicans versus the Democrats. I actually think a lot of it could be directed from a Biden White House if they choose to get into it. I don't know what that looks like, though. And again, like you were saying, a lot of that's going to depend on the people he gets as his advisors.
Do we have any additional questions? This was a great discussion. Thank you, Rob and Ashley. Last call for questions, but if we don't have any more, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And thanks, Rob and Ashley, for your insights. And please, everyone, join us for our next to be determined event in the future. You can follow us at Women's High Tech on Twitter. And we have a LinkedIn page now that everyone can join. So you can go find that and get connected with other people in our network.
I also put my email in the chat. I'm not sure where everyone works, but if anybody ever wants to get in touch or give me tips, that is where you can reach me.
And Rob, please pass on our thanks to Congresswoman Brooks for everything she's done for us. Hopefully we get to have one more event with her before she's finished. But, we're a big fan and she'll be very, very missed. And I'm sure you're hearing that a lot nowadays and will be for the next few months. But thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. We'll make it happen.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thanks so much.
Take care.